you can take significantly less damage by positioning yourself in a way where only part of you sticks out from behind a wall. The easiest way to do this when doing outposts is by shuffling as close to the edge of your cover as possible with your right side sticking out, and if you do this the right way, the enemy will not be able to shoot at you, but you'll be able to hit them just fine. If the enemy is really tall, the same also goes for playing behind certain types of cover, such as boxes. The box will cut off where their bullets are coming from, which is the center of their body, but you are still able to shoot, let's say, the top of their head, and this will allow you to survive so many boss fights. But those are just 2 tips out of 100, so let's dive into it. Don't always trust the reload graphic. Some weapons, like certain handguns, like Nazaiser's Devotion, actually let you shoot again before the reload graphic has finished. In the same vein, almost every single weapon in the game lets you cancel the reload early by performing an ability, or rolling, or grappling. All you need to do is wait for your character to put the magazine into the gun, and then you are free to do anything. By the time whatever you're doing is finished, you will be fully reloaded as well. If you are running or using a high-speed ability like Bunny's Sprint, if you try to do a full 180, your character will actually stop and you'll lose your momentum. However, if you hold a backwards movement input and add a roll, you will roll backwards, and as long as you turn your view around, by the time the animation finishes, you will keep all of your momentum coming off the ground. Speaking of Bunny, her AoE ability will actually proc based on how fast you are going. So if you want to get more procs or activations off, all you need to do is sprint, use your sprint ability, roll, double jump, or even grapple. If there's one Transcendant or red module that you really want, you can actually combine 4 of your duplicate red modules to have a guaranteed chance of getting another red one, potentially even the one that you want. But what many don't know is that you can combine 4 yellow modules for a decently low but still a chance of you getting a red module as well. When the Hanged Man is in a frenzy and is charging up his massive split beam attack, it will take approximately 6 seconds from him to start before he actually fires. Take this moment to stop and just destroy the cannon to actually get progress on the boss. If you're grinding for an outpost, and I'm gonna be honest, most of us are at this point, and you don't want to wait for the 5-minute timer, all you need to do is fast travel to a different area and then fast travel back for a chance to get put into a new instance. What you can do is also go to Albion, make your instance private, and then go back for a very high chance of being put into your own whole new instance. Keep in mind though that there seems to be a limit how many instances you can create in a short period of time, so if you notice that you're no longer getting your timer reset, just go back into Publix for a little while and get back to it later. If you're grinding a specific mission, you can save an infinite amount of time if by the end of the mission you hold F2 or whatever button is on console and then hit the restart mission button in the bottom right. This will restart the mission and send you back to the very beginning without you needing to fast travel nearby and then walk all the way. When you're out and exploring or just going for the missions and you see these gray icons on the map, make it a habit of actually going there. By getting close enough, by fighting these transporters, you will unlock a fast travel point, which will let you get back to where you were much faster down the line. What many apparently don't know is that Albion also has one of these transporters or fast travel points. Just look down on the map. In the bottom left of the map, right next to the research, there is a transporter you can take as well. If you have an item or ability with an ungodly high cooldown, like Lepic with his ultimate or even his passive ability, which has a 10-minute cooldown by default, you can save a ton of time by fast traveling out of the zone and then back to the nearest transporter. You can also just let yourself die and then respawn to get all your cooldowns reset as well. After you have received your first ultimate weapon and after you have leveled it up and performed a weapon level readjustment to level 100, don't forget to re-roll it in the workbench as well. If you don't do this, it will keep the same extra stats that had in level 1, and I'm already telling you they are not as good as any other stats for a weapon. If you're using a non-ultimate weapon, this automatically scales, but as for ultimate weapons, it does not. You need to manually do it. If you want to stay in the know and stay ahead of everyone else in the first Descendant, make sure that you've subscribed to the channel to catch any new uploads. Some weapons, like basically all SMGs, have a random bloom pattern, which means that the bullets will kind of just go in basically any direction. But some weapons, like the Eternal Willpower AR, actually have a recoil pattern, meaning that if you learn how to recoil travels, in this case it just goes straight up really fast and then a little bit to the right, you can learn how to compensate for that while pulling in the opposite direction. While there can be a little bit of bloom, you can still be very accurate across very long ranges without ever modding any recoil. When you're doing a void interception and you get a part yellow, this means that you want to grapple on top of it. Once you've started a grapple, the boss will try to throw you off. Hold your secondary fire, in the case of PC that would be mouse 2, for the entire duration that they're trying to throw you off, and try to stay on top of them for as long as possible. For the entire duration you are hanging onto the enemy, none of the damage that your teammates are doing will count towards their frenzy bar. Also, every boss has a frenzy bar. You can see it by activating your scanner, and then there's a purple bar underneath their health. Once this is full, they'll enter their frenzy mode, which you probably know what it is by now. Also, speaking of bars, when you are hanging onto the boss, there's this little yellow bar next to your character, shows how far you are from getting thrown off. You want to hold on for as long as possible. You also want to make sure that you break whatever you're holding on to before this bar runs out. As the boss gets stunned, any damage done to the boss as they are stunned will not count towards their frenzy. While most, if not all, sub-attack modules are useless, keep in mind that there actually are special modules for grappling. I personally would recommend the long distance maneuvering, as it lets you do way longer grapples, which adds up, but it also makes it much easier to grapple bosses to avoid interceptions. Also, the more you upgrade the grapple, the more additional capacity your Descendant will get. Not many people think of this, but you can actually upgrade the slot with a crystallization catalyst to increase how much capacity you get from it as well. Out of all the Descendants in the game, I'd have to say that Sharen is one of the few that are a must-have, and that's because she lets you perform infiltrations where you can go invisible, play an outpost, go invisible, and hack these terminals. You get access to certain amorphous materials that you cannot get otherwise. A hot tip for Sharen specifically, you want to make a build or setup specifically for these infiltrations. What you want to do is maximize skill duration. If your skill duration is high enough, you can basically clear all the terminals without any problem. I also want to add another great way to get the most out of it is knowing that while invisible, Sharen can not only sprint, but she can roll and even grapple. When grinding void shards, the most efficient shard fragment that you can run for monomer is of course the Fallen Archean Fortress. As for polymer, assuming you have fire, you really only have one choice, but that is the Lost Supply Depot in Vespers. If you want to get inorganic void shards as fast as possible, you're gonna need Freyna or any toxic Descendant, in which case the best and most optimal zone you can run will be the White Knight Gulch mountaintop. And if you're looking for organic void shards, you're gonna want to run Dune Base in Hagios. When building your Descendant, always make sure that you have at least one increased health module. If you want even more survivability, look into getting a little bit more defense, but there's actually not much of a point in getting more defense past the 27.5k mark, as you'll just see diminishing returns. If you struggle with staying alive versus certain bosses, almost all bosses except the Bride deal more damage with tick damage or damage over time rather than direct damage. So instead of building resistance, you want to get these golden mods that specifically are meant to stop you from catching fire or getting frostbite or getting electrocuted and so on. In most cases, you can actually dodge these artillery attacks just by jumping at the right time. You don't actually have to get out of the circle, just make sure that you're airborne by the time they blow up. Almost all area of effect abilities will go through walls. In some cases, even non-area of effect abilities will go through walls, if you would count Sharen's ultimate, for example. Speaking of abilities, her area of effect abilities and the speed boost makes Bunny the best Descendant for any type of farming in the game. Because of this, I would also say that Bunny is the go-to Descendant to clear any additional mobs when running void interceptions. Just make sure to clear any Rollipolis or Kingfishers when you see them spawning. Bunny is also usually the ideal choice if you're going to have a runner for certain boss types, such as the Hanged Man or Frostwalker. In the case of Hanged Man, this means that Bunny wants to pick up the cube and run around with it while the enemies drain the Hanged Man from all the frenzy. And as for the Frostwalker, the Bunny or whoever is the runner has to keep an eye on where these fires actually end up after you break a weak point cover. At the 750 mark, the runner needs to start picking up these fires all the way up to 5 stacks, and then by the 730 mark, they actually want to pick up the 6th, which starts an area of effect ability, which will guard the runner and anyone nearby them from the Frostwalker's massive ice attack that otherwise would clear the entire lobby. If a teammate ends up getting caught by this ability, if they weren't in the fire, you can still run up to them afterwards as they are frozen to thaw them. The first lobby ending attack starts at 730 and the second one starts at 430. When she is invisible, Sharen can actually start and finish a full revive of her teammates without ever actually taking aggro. Keep in mind though, Sharen's invisibility does not work when you're doing a void interception or, a big boss. It is in your best interest to have a loadout specifically built for farming. What I like to do is have a preset with a Descendant that has good AoE damage, so in my case that would be Bunny, but you could use Balby for that, and then select components that have modifiers for drop rates, such as additional gold drop rates, module drop rates, equipment drop rates, or even Descendant experience, or even weapon proficiency. If you've played the game for a while, you know that it is a little bit clunky to try to bunny hop or jump over and over again. What you may not know is that you can still kind of pull off a bunny hop if you just wait a fraction of a second after you have landed to jump again. Your weapon's fire rates, such as your DPS FPS is directly tied to your frame rate in the game. So make sure all your settings as low as possible, and depending on how frames you can actually squeeze out of the game, consider low resolution as well. According to MUI, the difference between 40 frames per second and 120 frames per second makes for a 25% difference in damage, and that's not even counting the compounding effect you would get from adding more modules. When waiting for an outpost, you don't actually have to keep opening the map to see how much time you have left. Instead, just hover over the waypoint and hit the waypoint bind, and there you go. You can see the time just by looking at it. If you're looking for a specific item or part that can drop from all kinds of amorphous materials, pull up the access info, click on over to amorphous materials, and then search for the specific item you want. In this case, I would search for the Afterglow Sword Nanopolymer. By pulling this up, this shows all the different materials that drop the item that I want, and if I hover over it, I can even compare drop rates that much more easily. As of patch 1.0.3, you will now get slightly and actually noticeably more drops if you're killing mobs on hard mode. As such, at the very least, when farming out in the fields and killing elites, usually in almost every case it will make more sense to run the missions on hard rather than on normal. Also, obviously, you really want to unlock hard mode before you start grinding for anything because of these drop rates and the amorphous material patterns and so much more. These things you find all over the map actually have a tiny little dude emitting a hologram. These will tell you that there actually is an encrypted vault nearby. If you hit your scan button or your SC or whatever you want to call it, and it plays this sound, that means that there is an encrypted vault nearby. Just follow the sound of the encrypted vault and you will eventually find it. Most encrypted vaults will always spawn in more or less the same spot, so it makes sense to try to figure out a loot path or a few vaults that you can regularly come back to if there is a specific item that you want. The crafting materials coming out of an encrypted vault will vary depending on the region that you are in. You can get even more of the crafting materials by opening the vaults on hard mode, and even more, as well as making the minigame to unlock the encrypted vaults easier by running Enzo. If you fall from a greater height, if you shoot or use a skill right before landing, you will cancel the landing hero animation. For your own sake, when you're putting your loadout together, try to have at least one weapon of a different ammo type so you never run out of ammo. Also, make sure that all three of these different weapons are different damage type, which can be burst, crush, or even piercing damage. Different factions and enemies have weaknesses to different types of damage, meaning that some will be more weak to your primary weapon and some will be weaker to your secondary weapon. This makes even more sense when you're playing Void Interceptions, as most, if not all, bosses have completely different weaknesses depending on the cover that you're shooting. Sometimes the middle cover takes more damage from crushing, sometimes it takes more damage from burst. It really depends on the boss itself, so it makes sense to use the right weapon or the right tool for the job. In addition to their weak point, they also have a flesh point weakness, so once you break the covers for that weak point, whatever is listed as their weak damage type in the boss selection screen is the type of damage that will deal the most damage to them once you shoot that exposed weak spot. Whenever you use the right type of weapon damage against an enemy, the damage numbers will light up in green, assuming it's not a crit or a weak point shot, in which case that will take priority and make it yellow or orange. As far as damage goes, in addition to the damage type, if you're struggling to deal meaningful damage to any bosses, you can see a massive damage boost by equipping some type of elemental damage enhancement, such as a fire enhancement, electric enhancement, or toxic enhancement. You get what I mean. And you can see what the boss you're struggling with is weak against by looking at the boss selection screen, where you can see all their weak points and so much more. If you're out in the wild, you can also see the primary elemental weakness as well as the type of damage just by scanning them. Also, if you have a hard time finding an enemy, if you use your scan, it will show these markers, which will help you actually find the enemy that you're looking for. And while we are at the subject of scanning will also show these diamond icons, which will help you find any nearby resources that you can find on the map, such as munitions boxes. You can actually grapple on enemies. By doing so, it will work as any other grapple, but it has the added benefit of actually temporarily stunning the enemy for the duration of the grapple. You can use this to your benefit by grappling enemies that have slow to charge attacks that, if left unchecked, will absolutely destroy you. Just keep in mind that this technically doesn't work on Void Interception bosses nor any elites. Make sure that you have the right reactor for the job. An ultimate reactor will only give you the maximum amount of skill power if you use the right weapon mounted. That means that you need to have the weapon that's listed on the reactor not only equipped, but actually hold it in your hands. If you switch to any other weapon, you don't get that additional skill power. The reactors will also power up different types of abilities depending on something we'll get to in a little bit, that being singular abilities, fusion abilities, dimension abilities, and so on. And on top of that, they also have a little bit of RNG when it comes comes to what type of modifiers that they have, which can be health or item acquisition drop rate or really basically anything. All of this varies by each reactor that you can find. If you want to grind for a specific reactor that enables your specific weapon and your specific ability type and, you know, a general element of the Descendant that you're playing, keep an eye out for the mission rewards in hard mode. By hitting mission rewards and then show all, you can actually see where you can get the reactor that you're looking for. It's split depending on the region. The reactor will enable different types of weapon based on ammo. It will also enable certain types of abilities, again, depending on the region. And then finally, the final modifiers are completely RNG. These specific spots will rotate on the weekly, as you can see in this menu right here. And sometimes you cannot get a reactor that both couples the weapon and the type of skill that you have and the element that you have at the same time. So you have to keep an eye on this if you want to enable your character to their highest potential. If you're struggling with winning fights around outposts, don't worry, you're not the only one. If you use the trick I mentioned at the start of this video, where you kind of expose as little of your body as possible and stand outside of the walls of the outpost, this lets you deal damage to the enemies as they approach you while you still have some cover. In most cases, it will still count as you standing inside of the mission area if you're close enough to the wall. Make sure that you favorite the stuff you want to keep, because if you don't, it will somehow get auto-trashed. Also keep in mind that adding something to a preset does not save it from getting auto-scrapped once you go through your junk. So before you put something in a preset, make sure that it is actually favorited, otherwise you're gonna lose that. When it comes to running certain missions, such as void fragments, you are better off running these in the public, because having more teammates won't make it any worse, and it will make it a lot easier. In some cases, you can half the amount of time you spend per fragment run. That being said, if you are running outposts, especially as a Sharen, you are better off running it in a private lobby. And assuming you know how to clear most bosses, you are sadly actually better off running these in private as well, because most randoms are unreliable, and the more people that are on your team in a void interception, the more health the boss will have. You'll be surprised just how much easier it is to clear some of these when there are no other liabilities. Your weapon proficiency will go up as long as you are in combat and enemies are being killed and giving you experience. As for how much you gain, you will gain significantly more proficiency, about 4 to 5 times as much for the weapon that you are holding versus the one you have stowed. This doesn't mean you have to shoot with the weapons. If enemies are being killed, that will still count the same amount. You can either use your own abilities or even have your teammates kill enemies as well, and will count all the same. You can also get more weapon proficiency per run by equipping 3 of the same weapon, and you can squeeze even more weapon proficiency out of your grind by equipping a component that gives you additional weapon proficiency as well. When you're using a grapple, make sure that you grapple laterally as you go towards your target. This will let you build more speed, and if you cancel it at the right time, it will keep you zooming forwards. If done properly, you can get more than 3 grapples off before you even hit the ground. If we don't count any type of power-up abilities like bunnies or glaze, the fastest ways to travel are going to be grappling, rolling, and then sprinting in that very order. And then of course, slow walking, but why include that, right? If you're struggling with shielded enemies, they can be knocked over by you performing a sub-attack or even jumping and then immediately slamming down into the ground. If they don't get knocked onto their back, at the very least, they'll get knocked over a tiny bit, which lets you deal damage and hopefully kill them. You can animation cancel most of the unique weapon abilities like Lepik's ultimate or Freyna's ultimate by starting the ability and then rolling immediately afterwards. When you are running one of those quests where you have to pick items up and put them in a big dumpster or trash bin, keep in mind that after picking an item up, you can still sprint, grapple, and even roll to get there faster. And if you're playing a Descendant with a movement ability like Bunny or even Glay, while you can't activate an ability as you are holding an item, you still activate the ability right before picking up the item, which gives you the speed boost, all while you're carrying that very item. Weapon readjustment will be your biggest friend come late game. Rolling on these 4 major stats will make a big difference in how your weapon handles. Now it depends on the specific weapon that you have and the build that you do have, but generally speaking, you will want firearm ATK, critical strike, damage, or rate, assuming you don't have a low crit rate weapon, and then of course weak point damage, assuming the same thing. In most cases, unless you're building a weapon for fighting bosses, I guess, you don't really want any bonus damage against certain factions or even colossi, hip fire damage, and in some cases even recoil. But ultimately it's all personal preference. If a teammate goes AFK on you and you cannot let that go, if you want to report them, just pull up the social tab and you can see them in your party or even in recent or nearby players, or or you can just walk up next to them, hold the interact button, which is T on PC, and then hit the report button from there. As of the latest patch, there is now an option to report AFK specifically. And speaking of things added in the latest patch, a must-have setting that you really want to toggle, especially with all these explosive glaze, is called Show Explosion Effect during combat that you can find under Display in your settings. If you want it cinematic, you can keep it on Show All Targets, but if you actually want to see what you're shooting at, you should probably set it to Show Only yourself. Otherwise, you will not be able to see what you're shooting at, come any void interception. There are some crafting materials that you can only get by defeating elite Volgas inside of certain missions or dungeons or whatever you want to call them. If you want to get some of these materials, you can save hell of a lot of time by starting a private run and then playing until you get to elite enemy. It is usually only one before the boss, then leaving as soon as you have the material, and if you need to run it again, just run it again. The boss rarely, if ever, even drops that crafting material that you are looking for, and it takes way longer to clear the entire dungeon than you just re-rolling it. When doing these annoying ass Nintendo Mario looking ass platform missions, I mean, this is a fucking looter shooter, not a platformer. Like, come on. A great way to avoid yourself from getting slung off of the platform when you're grappling is just starting a grapple and then letting go of the keyboard or joystick completely. This will pull you up and let your character climb, and in most cases, you'll stay safe. Normally what I do is jump around until I fall, and then I use the grapple to get back up again while not touching the joystick or movement to safely reset and then start it all over again. If you're playing any mission that has one of these capture circles, just stand in a circle and ask your teammates to do the same. If all 4 of you stand in the circle, it is infinitely faster than if only one does. The same goes for these Kuiper capture events. Just stand in one each and you will clear it so much faster. Unless you really want gold, I don't see a point in ever selling anything to the vendor in Albion. Just dismantle instead. Almost all enemy attacks in the game, including the bosses, are projectiles, and they're mostly not homing. So if you keep running, double jumping, and rolling, depending on their range, there is a good chance that they will never hit you as long as you never take a step backwards where you came from. One of my favorite examples is Dead Bride, where you can just move laterally as she's spinning the ice pizza over her head and she'll never really hit you. You can actually get mastery level by completing missions for the first time. Once you have beat the story, you can still run through the entire game hard mode to get an additional 200 mastery experience. This only works once and then you can't do that again. You will also get mastery experience by leveling up new characters and, of course, by getting new weapons proficiency. The keyword is new. Re-rolling with the crystallization shard where you now have to level up your weapon or Descendant again does not count. Honestly, if you want to power level your mastery, I really recommend grabbing a full loadout of weapons that you have low proficiency on and then just going to town. Ideally by playing one of the Defend Albion resources, especially the one in the swamp, because you kill so many enemies. When the Dead Bride performs her spinning pizza move, try to position yourself in a way where there's a piece of floating cover or floating piece of the map between the pizza and yourself. All of her shots will sink into the cover and she'll be standing still, which gives you completely free damage. If you're fighting a boss that teleports you into the middle of the map before slamming down, like Executioner, Devourer, or Pyromaniac, as soon as the teleport has finished, do a quick double jump to the side to get out of the way and not be animation locked in the middle of the slam. Enemies with this red circle on their head or wherever on their body can only be killed by gunshots to that specific part of their body, usually their weak point. But keep in mind that these enemies can also be killed by abilities or even your charged sub-attack or melee. If you're doing hard mode missions and you want to get the best drop rates for amorphous materials, you will need to re-roll the challenges, which gives you a higher kill percentage score modifier, as this will save you a lot of time and actually make it doable. In some missions, you can just keep killing the ads on the final boss to reach the score threshold, but it'll be significantly faster if you can get it to a 200 to 250% modifier reroll. Just keep in mind that on some missions, like Unknown Laboratory, you are gonna need grapple or jump. So if you get a roll which lets you disable both, then you won't be able to complete the mission at all. So try to think ahead before making the same mistake that I did, because the game does not care about you at all. Some bosses, like Executioner, has a status after his first frenzy that makes him take a lot less damage. So you want to get somebody with a minus defense weapon like the Incisors Devotion, or with an ability or module that disables their statuses, as this will make them a lot more squishy and much easier to kill. I've come around on this, but if you're running missions for certain amorphous materials, it can sometimes be more worth it to go for the normal mode 3% drop rates rather than the bigger 6% ones. It really depends on how fast you can clear each mission or instance or run. If you can get more than 2 amorphous materials with the 3% drop rate and unlock them within the time it would take you to get the 6% ones, probability wise it makes more sense to go for the 3% as you'll get more tries over time, and it really adds up. I'd say as a rule of thumb, if you are running several people in a stack, it will be faster if you go for the 6% hard mode missions. Just try timing yourselves and you'll see whether that's true or not, since you can clear it fast enough anyways. But if you are solo queuing like myself, it may make more sense to go for the 3% because adding more people to a 3% run won't actually make it go much faster if you know what you're doing. And that's also another huge tip, and this applies to a lot of things in game. In most cases, you want to make sure you have a stack or players that you can regularly group up with. I do have a Discord channel where you can find like-minded peers to grind with or just hang around with over at discord.gg/Ottr, so I hope to see you guys there. Also, speaking of which, you can access any dungeon, hard or normal, through this terminal in Albion. There's no need to jump in and run all the way over and over and over again. Also, in most cases, it will be faster for you to go to Albion and then go to the terminal and then jump into a dungeon than you hitting the restart button in the summary screen, because this thing takes forever. Also, closing out is a thing I've learned by being pretty bad at movement, I guess, which is that while you cannot cross some larger gaps because they're, well, too far away, if you manage to jump and get close enough to the other side, if you jump into a gap, it will actually spawn you on whichever side you're the closest to once you fall out of the map, meaning that it might be faster for you to go for a Hail Mary and jump as far as you can to then get respawned on the other side than walking all the way around. And wow, I cannot believe that was 100. But if you guys enjoyed the video, I have way more things to share. I actually didn't even go through all of the tips that I did have, so I hope to see you guys over on the Twitch once we're going live next time. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the tips. I hope you will be a lot better, and I'll see you all next time. Peace out.